Have you ever stopped to wonder if trying to help could somehow actually make things worse? It's a really tough question, but it's one we have to ask. Today, we're going to dive into a super powerful framework called Do No Harm, and it's all about navigating the tricky world of actually trying to do good. And this right here, this is the core idea of everything we're about to talk about. The moment you introduce something new into a situation, whether it's food, medicine, or money, it's not just sitting there. Nope. It immediately becomes a part of the local system, and it can start shifting the balance of power in ways you might never, ever see coming. Most of us start from a really good place. We see people suffering, and our gut instinct is to jump in and help. But if there's one massive lesson from the do no harm approach, it's this. Just wanting to do good by itself is nowhere near enough to guarantee a good outcome. And we're not talking about vague risks here. The dangers are incredibly specific. You can accidentally pour gasoline on the fire of old rivalries. You could end up making one group look more legitimate than another. You can even create brand new tensions out of thin air, like, say, between refugees and the communities that took them in. The road to disaster can absolutely be paved with the best of intentions. Okay, so if just having good intentions isn't the answer, then what is? Well, the secret lies in learning to see the invisible currents that are always flowing through a community. And the Do No Harm framework gives us these two critical tools to map them out: dividers and connectors. So, dividers. The best way to think about them is like social fault lines, right? They're the deep cracks running through a society. They are all the issues, the old stories, and the fears that create that us versus them mindset, the stuff that really fuels conflict and suspicion. And these can be, well, pretty much anything you can imagine. We're talking about deep-rooted political fights, painful memories of wars from generations ago, a struggle over who gets the good land or the few jobs available, or, of course, the incredibly powerful and often explosive politics of ethnic or religious identity. These are the forces that drive wedges between people. But here's the thing. No society is just a collection of cracks. Even in the middle of the worst conflicts, there are things that still tie people together. We call these connectors. They're the sources of strength, of resilience, and they're often the quiet, overlooked foundations where peace can actually start to grow. So on the other side of the coin, you might have people from groups that are totally at odds, but guess what? They might still shop at the same market, go to the same hospital when they're sick, or use the same road to get around. Families can be connected through marriage. Sometimes a respected elder can talk to both sides. Or hey, even a shared threat, like a flood or an earthquake, can suddenly remind everyone that they're all in it together. These are the bridges that span the divides. So let's just boil this down. Dividers are the forces of separation. They fuel conflicts, and frankly, they're often pretty obvious. Connectors, on the other hand, are the hidden forces of unity that can build peace. So the whole game, for anyone trying to help, is to figure out how to avoid hitting those dividers and, wherever you can, actually strengthen the connectors. All right, enough with the theory. Let's see how this stuff plays out in the real world with a classic case study. This is the kind of scenario aid workers talk about all the time because it just perfectly illustrates how these forces work on the ground. Okay, so picture this scene. A village has welcomed families who had to flee their homes because of violence. An aid group shows up with food. Now, they do their assessment, and it's clear the displaced families are the most vulnerable. So they decide to give the food only to them. I mean, it seems totally logical, right? Fair, impartial. What could possibly go wrong? But what happens next? What are those hidden ripple effects from a decision that, on the surface, seems so obviously right? Well, here's where it all goes sideways. First, a brand new divider that's created, or at least a dormant one gets supercharged. The local hosts, who are also poor, who are also struggling, see the newcomers getting free stuff, and the resentment starts to build. You start hearing the whispers, why them and not us? A new conflict starts to simmer. And second, a really crucial connector gets weakened. The locals' initial goodwill, that human sympathy that made them open their homes in the first place, it gets chipped away. That priceless bridge of compassion gets damaged, maybe for good. So that whole story is a perfect example of the trap. The question is, how do we avoid falling into it? How do we get from just meaning well to actually doing good? Well, this is where the Do No Harm framework gives us a clear, practical way to think through this stuff before we act. It really comes down to a simple 3-step process. First, you've got to analyze the context. Actually sit down and map out all the local dividers and connectors. Second, you have to analyze your own project. Ask yourself how every little detail, from who you hire to how you deliver aid, is going to bump up against those forces. And third, find better options. Redesign your project so it actively props up the connectors and steers clear of the dividers. When you really get down to it, this entire way of thinking, it's all about one huge shift in perspective. It forces us to look past the simple act of giving something and to focus like a laser on the way we're giving it. And this really is the single most important thing to take away from all this. The problem in our case study wasn't the food. It was the how, the choice to give it to one group and not the other. A smarter option might have been something like a Cash for Work program to fix a road that everyone uses, hiring people from both the displaced group and the struggling local community. See, that how would have strengthened a connector, shared work for a shared benefit, instead of creating a divider. So, this whole framework was born in conflict zones designed for aid workers. But the core idea, it applies to, well, all of us, doesn't it? It teaches us to just pause and look for the unintended consequences of our actions, to try and understand the context we're in, and to ask ourselves that one simple question. Is what I'm about to do going to strengthen what divides us or what connects us? It's a question worth asking.